Welcome to Real ABM, a podcast for B2B marketing professionals who are looking to use ABM strategies to drive revenue. In each episode, we cover specific ABM plays and remove all of the BS and fluff so you can develop a custom ABM strategy, implement specific ABM tactics, and stand out as a marketer by generating revenue for your company. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Real ABM. I'm Pete Larenko.
And I'm Nick Bennett.
Today we're excited to welcome our guest, James Gilbert, who's the head of marketing at CRMNEXT. James, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. This is going to be good.
Great. So before we dig into the ABM journey and kind of get into the meat, James, of what we'd like to talk to you about, for the benefit of the audience, we just like to set up a few questions around getting to know you, your company, and really what your current maturity level at CRMNEXT is with ABM. So if you don't mind, James, spend a minute, tell us a little bit about your company, what you do, what stage company you are at, all that fun stuff.
So we are a CRM software provider for financial services. That's what we are at CRMNEXT. And so as you can tell, we focus on the financial services industry, but it's very unique because financial services traditionally is seen as like this really big industry. We actually get a lot more niche, which helps our ABM efforts to just community banks and credit unions. That's who we help solve. But we also have a split company. So we have a US-based company that oversees those things in the US side. But then we have a global company, a global side of the company that's a completely different entity. And we help some of the largest banks in the entire world over there. So it's two unique ABM strategies that we manage. We have about 600 people at this company, but we're like a little startup in the US. So we have a startup feel, but an enterprise feel. It's very unique. And I have two CEOs, so get that one, right? It's a fun journey. It's been a blast. Our marketing team here in the US is 7 strong. That does not include me. And then I would say our, ABM maturity level would be very sophisticated. I think we do things that I don't think anyone's doing. I guess that's me being a little bit cocky, but I pushed it against a lot of people, and sure enough, it's pretty incredible what we're doing with the team that we have.
Well, I think this is going to be good then. Would love to figure out and learn a little bit more and share with the audience what makes yours sophisticated. So let's dig in then. So James, I think to start, how do you define ABM at CRMNEXT? Just to make sure that audience-wise, we're in alignment with kind of your thinking around ABM.
So I don't even call it ABM. It's a GTM strategy. That's what we reference it as. And then the execution of it is really account-based experience. That's how we do it. So those twofold definitions is how I get everybody within the organization aligned. And that's not just sales. We involve customer success, product, also even HR. So that's how we do our ABM strategy that's GTM. And what we define the measures of going out into the GTM specifically against like our ICP and our target audience, that is all defined in the GTM strategy. And then the account-based experience part of that is what sales, marketing, customer success are doing together to keep the full funnel alive.
James, when you and the team at CRMNEXT pursued an ABM approach, was there a specific goal or objective in mind that you could share with us, right? Like, what was the hypothesis, if you will, that led to you guys pursuing this as a go-to-market strategy?
Well, I think the first one was, we already know that we have really good traction globally with some of the biggest banks in the world, but how they buy over there is very different than how people buy here in the US. So the hypothesis was if we got more niche and we only focus on credit unions and community banks, and some very specific levers that we also focus on even within that, were we able to get quicker wins? Were we able to lower the velocity of increase the velocity of the funnel, lower the sales cycles? And that was really the hypothesis, was all those numbers behind it. And then was marketing able to create more pipeline, and have more influence on revenue. And the result of that was, yeah, absolutely, which we'll get into, I'm sure. So
how did you, as people seek to do a ABM or account-based experience journey and strategy, James, how did you guys go about selecting accounts, identifying them? What did that process look like? And how often did you refresh or tweak that as needed in the beginning?
So this is the part that I reference, but everybody knows what intent data is, but really how we select accounts and also remove accounts. I think that's the part that also gets missed a lot in ABM strategies is we don't talk about how we actually need to remove an account from that list. It's always how we select them. And I think too often companies go out and they ask their sales team to select the accounts, but the sales team doesn't necessarily always have the data that's necessary to tell them, hey, did this person just buy a competitive product? And we're going after them and putting all this spend against them from a marketing perspective and doing all this collaboration around this account. And then after we get them on the call, we find out, oh, we just purchased a competitor. So I think you've got to have levers of intent. In a lot of the speaking engagements that I've done, I call it the intent cake. It's like a piece of cake, and the more layers you have, if it has crunch to it, if it has different layers, the better it's going to taste and the more that we're going to enjoy it, right? And I think too often intent is seen as like a single thread or a single data point, and it's got to be multi-layered. So everything we do from an intent perspective has to have 3 data points, so it can be triangulated. If it doesn't have 3 data points, then we don't use it as a measure. And then what we do to make sure that that's tangible for sales is we don't just throw over these intent signals to them and expect them to figure out how to use it. Instead, we score it all into a single score, and we build plays with our sales team and even our customer success team post-purchase on what they need from a content perspective to go after folks that are in the score threshold. So we use some vendors that people are very familiar with, like Bombora and others. And then we also have unique features that we do from an intent perspective that are only unique to this industry. Like some people will focus on technographic data, and that's extremely important to us because if we can find out what people's core system is, which is essentially the orchestration of all banks and credit unions, this industry that we focus on has more technology outside of maybe healthcare than any industry. So they use more tech. So their tech stacks are way more massive than any B2B company is ever going to deal with. And this core system sort of orchestrates all of that, but it does a terrible job at it. So we actually want to know which core system they have so that we can actually go in and help solve that orchestration, which becomes added value outside of just CRM.
Love it. James, you talk about the intent cake that you guys built. My guess is it was an evolution, didn't happen overnight. Do you mind sharing with us, what was the hardest parts about building it, rolling it out? What have you enjoyed the most about it? What's been the hardest? Like, help us understand what that journey looked like.
I think the hardest part is deciding which data points are actionable. That's always the hard part, right? I have a data background, so that made it, it was a little bit easier for me to know those things. But I'll give you an example. A lot of people do a podcast, right? It becomes a content generator, and that's great. That's fantastic, and it usually can bring people in to the pipeline and to revenue streams. But they don't often use it as a way to do market research. And it becomes a voice of the market, right? Mm-hmm. When you're asking questions, every single podcast, you're asking the same question to a different person in the same industry. And you ask, what are you passionate about that you want to talk about? And just leave it open-ended. And you find that 9 times out of 10, people are talking about the exact same subject. You know exactly what the market is focused on and exactly what they're worried about. You do that over 30 episodes and over a year. Now you have a research report. So we don't even leverage Gartner and Forrester like we should because we get it through our podcast. So our podcast is a layer which we call our customer voice. That's one layer of the cake. Outside of that, we also have our own customers on our podcast, and we interview them all the time, and we talk to them about what are their concerns, even with their own product, and what are we not helping them solve for? So having customer success and also product as functions in our strategy allows us to build this layer that we know is going to be actionable, because now we can take that, everything that we do from the podcast, and we can build a research report that is actionable and people want it, right? We can also use it as a way to identify pain that we might not know in the sales process. Because remember, sales is making a lot of guesses on what pain is going to be through their sales process. But you guys know this as buyers, our pain that we describe to a vendor is very different than the actual pain that we often have. And how people buy is multi-channel, it's multifaceted. It is a long journey, and it's very rarely a short one and done unless you're an e-commerce platform.
Love it. So you talk about layers of the cake.
Mm-hmm.
I do like cake, so we won't go digress too far though. So I guess my thinking, James, is another layer of the cake is probably the channels, the tactics, the different strategies that you use within an ABX or ABM go-to-market approach to best reach your audience. So besides some of the things you've shared around using your podcast as market insight, turn that into reports, things of that nature, what other, could you help us understand some of the channels that you've used? You talk about sophistication. So, why did you choose some of the channels that you have? What do some of those channels look like? And from your perspective, James, what's worked and what hasn't? I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's some stuff you want to keep sensitive, so we respect that. But, help us understand what that layer of the cake looks like, if you could.
So we have 8 different layers to that cake. So we have 8, just like the customer voice, there's 8 completely different layers that are unique. One of them is some of that technographic data. That becomes one. Another one is we do have a dual funnel. So we still do traditional demand gen, and we layer that data in and the insights that we're getting with people's journey into our ABM strategy. Because you have the one-to-one and the one-to-many, and I think that oftentimes if you understand the funnel, you can also make more strategic decisions on how you go about building an account-based marketing strategy into that. So 8 different layers of the cake. Those are a few of them. I think that a couple of things that I think is worth mentioning, like you don't have to have a dual funnel, and you don't have to have 8 layers of intent. Everyone starts somewhere, and I think where a lot of people are started right now, as ABM has been around forever. It's not like this new thing. It's just this new term that people are talking about. And I think one of the things that companies have been doing, at least what I've noticed the last 5-6 years, is they think ABM is, all right, so I'm going to help sales select the accounts, and now I'm going to spray and pray with advertising against those accounts. And that's really it. And then they go to sales and they're like, hey, are we making an impact? And they're like, oh yeah, well, we're influencing revenue, right? So it's got to be deeper than that, which is why I think the dual funnel really, really works. Because when you can tie the creation of this opportunity through the whole journey, happened at the touch point of where marketing started, or happened at the touch point of where SDRs started. That's a whole nother thing, right? It's like in an ABM strategy, a lot of companies have SDRs as well, and they're considered sort of this middle part of the funnel that never gets tracked. And they'll get credit for generating something and creating an opportunity, but you don't look at it as in a journey approach. So then attribution becomes a nightmare for everyone, which is a hot topic as well. Is how do you freaking attribute all this stuff? And how do you attribute things like a podcast that maybe has different influence? So all of these things, I think, kind of funnel into, you've got to first decide step one, and don't give up on, all right, once we're done with step one on spray and pray advertising, if that's where you're going to start, what's the next step to that? So for us, we took this approach. I didn't want to do spray and pray. If we were going to do ABM, we were going to do at least 3 channels, always. And we weren't allowed, I wouldn't allow my team to launch a campaign that didn't include at least 3 channels. So it might be advertising through an ABM platform, but it's also, a unique chat experience when they come to the landing page, a unique direct mail experience when we actually can re-engage with them, an email experience as well. So I'll give you an example campaign that I've talked a lot about, which we called our Banklerette campaign. So people go to G2 Crowd, right?
Yep.
And that's a middle part of the journey. Why is it middle? Because first they have to know who your company is, which means they've already done a search on you. So get right there that G2 will never be a first touch.
Mm-hmm.
So then they go to G2 Crowd and they look at reviews. Now, what oftentimes happens is companies are sending them to a comparison page and they're saying, all right, this is how we're different. I mean, why do that? You can get that information on G2. It's no added value. So you're sending them down a journey that's not valuable at that point. So what we did is we created a campaign that we framed off of The Bachelorette, right? Hence why it's called the Banklerette. And we hired these actresses and actors during the pandemic to like act out our competitors and us and make fun of our competitors and us as like they're dating a CRM, right? And we did this and it was such a huge hit because the entire experience from the moment in which they saw an ad or an email and on the landing page and in the chat, they got a physical gift that was a rose that could last 5 years rather than a long-stemmed rose. And it blew people's minds away. That's why I say the execution of what we do at CRMNEXT is really account-based experiences. Because nothing that we do is like a single touch point where we're driving people to a landing page and then there's a form fill and then that's it, right? And nothing that we do doesn't involve sales in every part of those channels. So it's really an experience. I think that's where you can really, really win is when you have an omni-channel or multi-channel approach with sales entrenched in all of it and they understand the data points within the intent layers.
Love the example. You stole one of our questions, so thanks for that, James. One more question for me, and then I'll be curious if Nick. I don't know if your kids are cooperating at this point or not, but
I am good.
But James, for you, when you think, you mentioned about these experiences in that example, how often are you refreshing those experiences? Like, do you think about an experience as being kind of like a year-long campaign or approach, or do you think about it maybe in more like quarterly or monthly sprints, or like you don't even think about time at all? I'm curious how you think about experiences in terms of like time.
Quarterly.
I got it.
And in some cases, we even adjust those monthly. Okay. And it wouldn't be that way. Like on the global side, we don't. We look at it more like mid-year because you can't move as fast. But on the U.S. side, being more of a startup, you should be measuring things every week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter anyway. So we have really good measures of the impact that we're making. Not just from, we still track your traditional, like I know the MQL is dead, but we still track those things just from the standpoint of being able to see, funnel progression. But we also have different measures so we have like two separate funnels. We have the traditional demand gen, which you track through the funnel, top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. And then we have your ABM funnel, which we're looking at, now people call it an MQA, which is really no different than an MQL. It's just like a bunch of people at the account, right? So we look at that and we have a different scoring model against both so that we can get different layers of intent and data from that. And it's just had a huge impact. Like what we've been able to do, 98% of all, no kidding, 98% of all pipeline has come from marketing.
Wow.
No one can claim that, right? And it's not like we're not cheap. We're an enterprise sell. So being able to do that at an enterprise level with our software is pretty incredible. And like our sales team, like we don't just set them up like, all right, here's the account, here's what we're going after, this is what we're doing from a marketing perspective. Again, like we write their emails for them, we help them know exactly what to put in social. I mean, if you look on LinkedIn right now, you'll see a bunch of our sales reps talk about like this new campaign that we're running called Right on the Money. And everybody has a post that they're doing and a certain patch that they're going after. And this Right on the Money contest is actually meant to give people in our industry clout, and they can win this contest with a bunch of different industry leaders. But the nice thing is that it's an easy way for sales to say, hey, I know you're doing some great work at this credit union. Let's highlight it, and let's have industry experts look at it. So every approach that we do is an opportunity for sales to get a foot in the door.
That's amazing. I am back. You guys can still hear me, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Cool. This has been really good. So I want to talk about something, and it's more about tools. And you mentioned a few of them, but like, we don't have to get into names if you don't feel comfortable sharing. But like, what type of tools are you using? Like, what does your like stack look like from an ABM perspective for like intent plus automation plus direct mail, whatever it looks like? What kind of things do you use to pull those levers?
Great question. So earlier on, like, we use our own CRM, and it has marketing automation built into it. But our CRM is more meant for B2C. So we recognize that right away, and we're definitely not going to go out and get like our biggest competitor, which is Salesforce. So we needed to find a solution from a CRM and marketing automation perspective that would allow us the freedom and autonomy to do what we needed to do. And HubSpot ended up being that tool. So we use HubSpot, which that's where we do a lot of our scoring on an ABM perspective and traditional demand gen. We use Bombora. We use Terminus as our ABM platform, which it doesn't have a great integration with HubSpot. So that's a big like issue for us. But neither did any other vendor. Right. So we've been able to leverage it the way that we want. Like we have Terminus's full platform, from their chat experience to their Sigster email signatures and their ad platform and the data studio that they have.
Yeah.
We use Terminus there, and then we use Sendoso on the direct mail side. Really wanted to use Alice, but we did a match against some of the data points, and again with our industry, it wasn't great. So here's the suggestion I would give. Like, my background is marketing ops. That's how I grew up my whole career. So I knew these tools, and I know a lot of the newer players like in Flu2 and all those like niche players. And you should always take your TAM and your ICP and have those vendors do a match against them. And if they can't give you a match that's higher than 20%, it's not worth the investment. It will never be worth the investment. Okay, you'll be spinning your wheels. So this is a good example. Is I did this with Trust Radius, and I did it with G2. So G2 is another. We use their intent. That's another layer to our intent. And we had G2 do a match against our ICP, and we had Trust Radius do a match against our ICP. And Trust Radius came back. I might get in trouble for this. Whatever. Trust Radius came back, and there was like a 2% match, like 2%. Wow. And G2 came back and came in at a 45% match. So obviously I went with G2. And I don't think enough people do that. They get caught in the sales cycle and they're like, wow, this is really valuable. I just need to make my decision based off of comparisons. You got to make the vendor work a little bit for your business. And I think
hey, James, not to cut you off, have you ever found inaccuracies with those matches, et cetera? Like, I'm just curious with your experience. Like, have you ever been misled?
Yeah.
Curiosity?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, we did, before we picked Bombora, we had 25 topics, just like a lot of people start off. We even started with their free trial. Before we decided to go anywhere with them, we wanted to do a 12-month look back. So we took all of our key accounts in our ICP, and we said, match intent against all of these and tell us every topic that's against them. So the 25 topics that we had selected, we thought these were good, right? And we actually got a return back from them after that 12-month look back. We didn't even know those topics existed. And they were way more valuable than the ones we selected. But Bombora would have kind of, I mean, this is no knock on them, but they would have actually kind of led us astray if we wouldn't have asked for that 12-month look back. That's where the data points, I think, where a lot of people get caught up in, and even Bombora being valuable is, is it actionable, and does this really mean buying signals? So just within our Bombora layer, we have 8 different segments. And those segments are what Bombora calls clusters. And you take all these topics and then you roll them up into a cluster, and that cluster gives you value against all of the topics. So one cluster of ours is like competitive. So if somebody's searching Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics, those kinds of things, they'll get put into the competitive cluster. But if they're also searching for certain things that we know Salesforce and Microsoft doesn't solve for, and then we also layer in G2 and see that they're comparing Salesforce and others, we know they're in a buying frame right then and there. And that's the importance of triangulating the data. If we just use Bombora as a self, they could be a current customer of one of those competitors and just be searching on and trying to educate themselves. But when you layer in those additional segments with Bombora and then G2, you get a complete picture of like, okay, they're not, they might be a current customer, but they're looking to switch.
Honestly, that's hugely valuable. I feel like, honestly, I've talked to a lot of people about ABM and intent, and like you're one of the first, probably one of the only people that have mentioned that. So I think that's incredibly valuable, for sure.
Appreciate it. You're a popular guy, so that means a lot.
No, I just know how to navigate my way around. So we like to wrap up these sessions by kind of exploring and like offering the listeners some practical tips and advice, because everything at the end of the day, people love tangible stuff. Like, hey, CRMNEXT is someone that's like same size company as me. They have the same size marketing, somewhat of the same setup. Granted, maybe they're not in the same industry, whatever. It's something they can go and like look after. So I want to kind of dive into a few final questions with you of things that maybe you can offer some practical tips on. And so the first thing that I was thinking of is like, what are mistakes people make with ABM? And I'm sure you can add a lot here.
Well, number one, I think, again, it's the mentality that all your job is in marketing is to create influence and not actually create an impact. So I think that's one. And I think another big one is allowing sales to be the only data point to select the accounts. And then number 3 is not having data that helps you make strategic decisions related to your ABM. And that includes pulling accounts out.
That's a big one too. It's funny because we go through like a quarterly, we call it like a draft basically, and it's kind of like adding and removing type thing as well. And so we're doing that. But I've worked for companies in the past where like if they're in this list, they don't come out.
Well, and I got to say this too. I failed to mention one of the most important channels that I think plays a huge role. And Nick, you'll appreciate this, but that's events. Like events are huge for us, especially now that we're getting back to doing some in-person ones. It's been one of the biggest yields for us, and it's not the event itself, right? It's the how that weaves into our ABM strategy and how we can actually leverage that. That's just huge for us.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah, I totally agree with you there. I feel like another thing is like community and like how that plays into like that whole like event piece of it too. But it's, I digress there. What if someone isn't seeing success with ABM? Like, what would you suggest? Like, what are a few things that they could maybe like take a step back, reflect on, like try from a different approach? Like, what would you say here?
Well, I think first thing you got to do is measure yourself against the 3 things I mentioned. If you're not having success, are you doing those 3 things? And if you're not doing those 3 things, let that be your focus. If you are doing those 3 things and you're still not seeing success, I mean, every single week we meet with sales, customer success, and everybody that's involved in the GTM strategy. And we decide, all right, do we need to make a shift? Do we make adjustments? I think you've got to have a good line of sight into your reporting too to know if you're having an impact. And not be afraid to just point blank ask sales, is what we're doing shit or is it good? Like, just be real with people. And I think that we oftentimes get defensive in marketing, trying to prove our value and are we making an impact? And, you got to take a step back and realize that if you have a common goal, be a part of the common goal.
Yep, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I have kind of one last question for you. I feel like this is an interesting one because I feel like some people overlook it. And when I listen to podcasts or read things, people don't usually ask this question. So if you're building out a team, as yourself to help implement or run ABM or part of a GTM strategy, what skill sets or experience are you hiring for?
Well, if I didn't get a chance to hire all my team because I came in there with some of them. If I could start from scratch, I'm always going to start from a biased perspective. I need mops because there's just too much data, and I need it orchestrated and clean so that I can make really good decisions. Some of that I didn't have to do here at CRMNEXT because I did it myself. So instead, I went and hired somebody who could own content because that's going to be an important part of ABM. I also think that it's important to hire somebody who can own events because I think that's important. And then the last one I think that oftentimes gets overlooked, and I think this role probably gets the most undervalued of any in marketing, and that's product marketing. There's just so much stuff that those 4 roles can really do together, and the rest to me is history. I don't think you need somebody that is just dedicated to ABM. Here's why. When you have somebody who's dedicated to ABM, they're still having to solve for those other areas. So then you're talking about them trying to tap into a content team, which takes longer. If you build a structure where everybody has a common understanding of what you're trying to build from an ABM perspective, and you have those 4 roles, or my opinion is not gold here, so you could use other roles, but I think if you orchestrate it in a way where each one of those individuals are working towards that common goal of all right, we're focusing on these accounts, and this is how we need to approach it from our messaging and all that stuff. I think that's ultimately what wins when you're building a team.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree there. Pete, do you have any other final questions? I know we're coming up on time, but I wanted to just throw it over to you if you have anything else for James.
No, James, you're a wizard. So I think I like to wrap it up and just say, where can people come and learn more about you, CRMNEXT? Where can we put people to?
Well, I used to be a lot more active on LinkedIn. I don't have as much time, but LinkedIn's a good place for sure. And don't go to our website because we're revamping it and it really sucks. Honestly, we're doing. By the way, I think one of the most proud moments of my career has been here at CRMNEXT because we have done all of this completely off of our website. It's all been on landing pages. It's all been unique experiences, driving people to a single goal. That's pretty nuts. And I'm that's the part that I think I'm the most proud about, even outside what we've been able to generate from revenue in the pipeline. That's tough to do. So I'm excited about that. So eventually, you can go to our website and you'll see a new one, but that's not going to happen for a few months. So LinkedIn, and I got to give a shout out to Nick and Pete because I think this is a great initiative, and I think you guys are on to something here. So I think it's going to be good.
Amazing. Well, James, I definitely thank you for joining us. This for me, and I'm sure Pete feels the same way. This is more of a learning experience for me. I want to be able to level up, be the best marketer that I can be. And I mean, James, this too, community and fostering those relationships is huge. So I wanted to thank you personally for joining us today on Real ABM.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, James.